Hi, I'm Dr. Alex Badges, the quantitative ecologist from ACERC and the lead developer of PI Charter. PI Charter is our online dashboard and submissions portal for point intercept or PI aquatic plant survey data, hence the PI in PI Charter. Our app's mission is to provide a comprehensive statewide database for these data, like those being built in Wisconsin, Michigan, and elsewhere, to inform management, guide decision making, and facilitate a better understanding of the health and diversity of our inland lake communities. When you arrive on PI Charter, you'll find 4 tabs you can visit. You'll land on the Overview tab, but the tab I'll be covering in this video is the 4th tab, the Records tab. I cover the other 3 tabs in separate tutorials that you can find linked to on the app as well as on ACERC's YouTube channel. On the Records tab, you can dive deeply into the records in our database from specific lakes and even access and download the raw data from those surveys if you'd like. It's easier to describe what this tab does by showing you rather than telling you, so let's jump straight into using it. First, at the bottom, I'll note that just as on the Overview tab, there is a Disclaimers button. Clicking it will open a list of disclaimers about the contents of this tab. These include notes about the redacted protected taxonomic data, redacted data from surveys on tribal lands, redacted surveyors' names for surveys done by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, the as-is nature of the data shown on the Records tab, and our own QA/QC processes. I encourage you to read these disclaimers before using the tab more deeply. Now, note that the bulk of this tab is occupied by a box that has 3 tabs, all of which start out empty. This box is where records data will be shown once we select a lake and a set of surveys. We do that using the left-hand sidebar menu. Here, one of the options asks us to pick or search for a lake. We can select a lake using the drop-down menu, or we can search for a lake first to narrow down the options. We do the latter by backspacing with our keyboard out the no selection that starts there, and then by typing the name of a lake of interest, such as Peltier. Doing this will filter the options in the menu to make finding a specific lake of interest much easier. Once we select a lake, a second selector will appear displaying all of the PI surveys we have in our database from the selected lake, sorted by the date they were performed from newest to oldest. To view the data from a survey, we click its date in the menu. The app will then load those data into the box on the right-hand side of the tab. We can actually look at the records from multiple surveys from the same lake simultaneously if we want to. In the survey selector, either click and drag or use Control and click on your keyboard to select multiple surveys. Here I'll do the latter to select a set of 3 random surveys. This one, and this one. I'll now explain all the contents of the right-hand box of the tab. First, notice that this box has 3 tabs at the top: Littoral Frequency of Occurrence, or LFOO, Abundance Map, and Raw Survey Data. If you click the last of these 3, you will see an interactive table that shows the raw data from the survey or surveys you've selected, much as you might view them in an Excel spreadsheet. You have rows corresponding to spots in the lake that were surveyed, and columns denoting data about which taxa were seen at each of those spots, how abundant they were, depth, and many other data points. This table can be sorted using the arrows above each column, and it can be searched using this search box to filter records within the table. The table is also paginated so that a limited amount of data is shown at each time, and you can use these buttons down here at the bottom to navigate between the different pages. And you can scroll this table left and right or up and down using the scroll bars provided. This table is usually much bigger than what can fit on a single screen at one time. If any of the column names in this table feel unfamiliar to you, you can download a guide to all the column names in our database using the right-hand button at the top of this subtab. You can also download the entire spreadsheet that is shown in the table with a click of this left-hand button at the top, in case you'd prefer to peruse these data in Excel or in another program. On the LFFO, or Littoral Frequency of Occurrence tab, you can instead view a digest of the raw data, both in graphical and tabular form. If you've selected multiple surveys, as we've done here, the graph shown will be a line graph showing how LFOO is changing for each taxa over time within the surveys selected. This graph is interactive. You can hover over the points with your mouse to get more information about them. You can also scroll down to the legend beneath the graph and click specific taxa to remove them from the graph in case there are taxa you don't happen to care about at that moment. Double-clicking a taxon, meanwhile, will instead remove all taxa but the one that you have selected. Click or double-click again to undo any of these actions. There is also a toolbar that appears when you hover over the map that contains two really useful buttons. The first of these is this camera button here. If you click this, you will be able to download to your computer a picture of the current graph. This is great for including graphs in your reports. The second button of interest is this one with two arrows that says Compare Data on Hover. Selecting this option will change the hover behavior of the graph to show you the hover contents for every taxon from a selected date instead of just the one that you happen to be hovering over at that time, which makes comparisons easier. Now, if you instead select just a single survey for a lake in the left-hand menu, like so, the graph that you will see on this subtab is instead going to be a bar graph that shows for each taxon that taxon's LFOO in that one survey. This graph has many of the same features as the line graph, though a few fewer because there are fewer data shown here. If you have questions about how the graph you are seeing works, note that at least a few of the aspects of what I just described about these graphs can also be found in the Graph Instructions menu, open by clicking the button that says Show Graph Instructions above the graph. And some of those details are also contained there. Now, I haven't actually defined LFFO yet. If it's a measure you're unfamiliar with, basically it's the percentage of spots that were surveyed that contained a given taxon at any level of abundance relative to how many spots were surveyed that were hospitable to plants in the first place. Usually that's a function of depth. So it's essentially a measure of spatial prevalence. How inhabited is the lake by each taxon? LFOO is a very common metric to derive from PI survey data, and you will often see it reported in survey reports. If you want to know more about this measure and how we specifically calculated it for this tab, you can open the menu that says Define LFOO below the graph, and more information is presented there. Note, if you would prefer to see these same data not in graphical form, but rather in tabular form instead, there is a table subtab of the LFOO tab where you can view those data in tabular form instead, which may be easier for some workflows. The third tab in the right-hand box is the Abundance Map tab. Here, we display maps of the rake score data for each taxon found in each of the selected surveys. For example, this current map shows where Ceratophyllum demersum, also known as coontail, was detected and not detected in this one survey. The map is pannable and zoomable using both your mouse and these zoom buttons here in the upper left-hand corner. If you want to make sure you know what the colors of the different dots mean, make sure to consult the legend that is found in the bottom right corner of the map. In this particular case, yellow dots denote areas where coontail was detected in this survey. If you want to change the taxon or survey date of the map, you can do that using the selectors on the left-hand side of this subtab. The tab will automatically update the map as you make different selections, as I'm demonstrating now. Lastly, you will note that there is a button here on the left-hand side that will allow you to download the current map shown as an HTML file to your computer, which will preserve the ability to pan and zoom that map, which is pretty cool and makes it a great option for sharing. Now, I want to note that only about 50 to 60% of the current survey records in PI Charter's database can contain location data for the spots that were surveyed. Without those location data, we can't draw a map of the data. So if you select a lake that's lacking abundance data, and I will demonstrate that for you now, by selecting Pine Lake, you will note that the Abundance Map subtab actually gets locked and you will not be able to go there, which makes sense because there would be no map to show. Oops, I accidentally selected a lake that actually has location data. Let me try again. Let's try Mud Lake instead and see if that one has location data or not. Oh, see, this one doesn't. So you can see that I'm not even allowed to select the Abundance Map tab because this lake does not have any spatial data for it. If only lakes with survey records having spatial data are of interest to you, maybe because you really want to see these cool maps that we're presenting here, you can filter the records that you can select from to only be records containing spatial data using the checkmarks option in the upper left corner of the tab. Lastly, note that once you select one or more surveys for a given lake, the lake selector on the left-hand side actually locks. To choose a different lake, simply deselect all of the surveys that you've selected in this survey selector, and the lake selector will unlock again. With that, that concludes this tutorial for using the Records tab on PI Charter. We appreciate your interest in PI Charter, and we'd especially appreciate interest in submitting data to our database. This resource wouldn't exist without the cooperation of our many data partners, which you can find on our leaderboard tab. We hope that you are one already, or that you will become one in the future. Meanwhile, if you have any questions, feature requests, or bug reports, especially related to the Records tab, please feel free to contact me. My contact information can be found at the bottom of the app screen. Thank you and have a great day.